We're joined by DW correspondent Maya Schwader in Washington, and here in the studio, William Glucroft, our U.S. election expert. Good to have you both. Let's start with you, Maya. You are closest to the White House. What more can you tell us?
The information is very basic right now, Terry. It's basically what you've lined out for us. We know that he is positive. We don't yet know if he's showing any symptoms. We know that he and the First Lady are quarantining, but we don't know what sort of medical course it's going to take now. His doctors have said that he's feeling well, that he's going to continue to perform his duties to the best of his ability, but we are in new territory right now in terms of what's going to happen with the campaign, what's going to happen with his health. This has already been a year full of unprecedented moments, and here is yet another one.
The doctor, Donald Trump's doctor, has tweeted that, or said that Trump would continue to carry out his duties in the White House without disruption. What are we to make of that?
Well, he's clearly trying to send a positive message. We've seen both the president and the First Lady tweeting that they're in good spirits and they'll get through this together. It will be interesting to see how this trickles out through the rest of the power players in Washington. As you noted, Hope Hicks, the aide in question, who has also tested positive, was in close quarters with the leader of the House of Representatives recently. Trump himself has been in rooms with the leader of the Senate, with the vice president. These are people who meet with each other very often, and this virus is extremely contagious. Now, of course, we can't make any predictions, but this is something that's going to have to be kept an eye on at the very least. And of course, Trump, not well known for wearing a mask. In fact, he often mocks those who do wear masks, including his opponent, Joe Biden, for wearing a mask. So cavalier attitude towards protection, and now this has come home to him.
Well, I'll venture a prediction. I think there'll be a lot more mask wearing and a whole lot of testing going on. William, this, of course, has massive political ramifications depending on the severity of the infection that Donald Trump has. What impact could it have on the election?
As Maya said, this is such an unprecedented moment. We are about 4 weeks from the election. Thousands, if not tens of thousands of ballots have already been mailed in, many of which for Donald Trump. So we're looking at a man who we don't know what's going to happen. He may bounce back fine. He may show no symptoms, like many people have. But he's limited in what he can do. He's limited in his campaigning. He has to quarantine. Maybe, as Maya pointed out, members of his staff, maybe members of the government, both Democrats and Republicans in all levels, Senate, House, the White House, might have to quarantine. We just don't know. And we saw even Joe Biden, who is much more likely to be wearing a mask, and his wife and his aides, and they've been actually making a political issue out of it, wearing masks, showing that they're wearing masks, showing they trust the science. That was something that Donald Trump mocked him at the debate just a few days ago. And I think we can show a clip of just that moment that really takes on new context now.
I mean, I have a mask right here. I put a mask on, when I think I need it. Tonight, as an example, everybody's had a test, and you've had social distancing and all of the things that you have to, but I wear masks when needed. When needed, I wear masks.
Okay, let me ask.
I don't wear masks like him. Every time you see him, he's got a mask. He could be speaking 200 feet away from it. He shows up with the biggest mask I've ever seen. I will say...
I mean, we have the word in German that's also in English, Schadenfreude, and that is what a lot of people are saying right now. This is a man who has been denying the science, that's been denying the protocols, that has had very lax restrictions in the White House, despite claims of testing. And this is one of the major issues. This is where reality really meets the Trump world, which is they can't deny being sick, just like they haven't been able to deny this pandemic. And what we need, what the American public needs, what journalists need, what people all around the world need is a White House that more or less sticks to the truth, is going to tell us what's going on with the President of the United States and many of his closest advisors. It's more than just about Donald Trump. When the president has coronavirus, the presidency has coronavirus, and that has far-reaching political and policy implications.
Maya, we, of course, don't know how serious this infection is for Donald Trump, what is going to happen with his health. But assuming the president is incapacitated, what's the protocol? How will this be dealt with if Trump becomes really sick?
Well, all eyes then turn to Vice President Mike Pence, who has tweeted his thoughts and prayers for the president and the First Lady. And of course, another big question that comes up next is, well, then what happens with the campaign? As you mentioned, we are barely 4 weeks out from a massive presidential election, a campaign that has been very tempestuous. Donald Trump was scheduled to go today to 2 rallies, one in Wisconsin, one in Florida, both extremely hot states that both candidates need to win. Those are going to have to be canceled now. The president and the first lady are going to have to quarantine for 14 days. We are 13 days out from the second presidential debate. There were all sorts of jokes flying around after the disaster that was the first presidential debate that maybe the rest should be canceled. We don't know if we might actually be looking at that at this point.
Okay, but it must be said, we all wish Donald Trump a speedy recovery, or that his symptoms don't become too serious in this situation. But if they were to become serious, could the election be postponed?
There is some precedent for postponing, or rather for suspending, campaigns. Back in the early 20th century, another presidential candidate was taken ill and his opponent suspended his campaign for that duration. But postponing an election would be a very extraordinary step. As William pointed out, we have about 2 million ballots across the country that have already been sent in. 90% of U.S. voters, according to a BBC poll, have already made up their minds who they're going to vote for. It would be a very messy proposition indeed to postpone an entire election. Now, of course, as we've said, the campaign is going to have to take on an entirely new shape now. A lot of eyes are going to be on Joe Biden to see how he responds to this latest news. The latest tweet that we see from him is him attacking Trump and the Trump administration for their very lax response to the COVID pandemic. We have more than 200,000 people dead in this country, 1 million dead worldwide. And the president really has played to his base that this is really not that serious, that no one really has to worry about this. Don't bother wearing a mask or protecting himself. And now here we are.
William, this is a delicate situation also for the Democrats, how they're going to respond to this. Is there a risk for the Democrats in this if they try to exploit this situation with Donald Trump's health in question? How are they going to play this?
It is a fine line. I mentioned the word schadenfreude just earlier, and the Democrats will have to be careful not to seem to be gloating, not to seem to be making light of the fact that the president may be sick and at the very least is tested positive for coronavirus. What they can do is pivot back to the issue that they're really trying to make this campaign about, which is health care, which is preserving what's left of Obamacare. It's been chipped away a lot, but what's left of it, trying to strengthen it, putting something new in place if Biden is elected, to build on that. And by making the case, Donald Trump, being the president, is going to get the best possible care you can get in the country, which many Americans, particularly people of lower economic means, particularly people of color, have not been able to get and have been so strongly affected by this virus. That's the route that Democrats will probably take, and they have to be careful not to gloat, not to hit hard on Trump's playing down the virus before and now having it now.
Maya, there's great concern about how far this infection, this hot spot has spread, as it were. Donald Trump had contact, of course, with Joe Biden at that campaign on Tuesday, and a number of other people as well. Is there a risk that Joe Biden himself could be infected?
Well, I'm sure first thing in the morning, Joe Biden's going to wake up to this news and be taking at least one COVID test today. We also know, according to White House insiders, that CNN is reporting that Trump did a closed-door big donor fundraiser in New Jersey after it was known that his aide, Hope Hicks, was positive. So we're looking at what is going to happen with Joe Biden. We're looking what's going to happen with other big donors, with other Washington insiders. It really was stark when you watched the debate earlier this week to see how the Republicans on the Trump supporters on one side of the room were mostly not wearing masks, and how the Democrats and the Biden supporters on another side of the room really were. It really is living in two different realities in this country. The people who don't believe that coronavirus is really that big of a deal, and the people who do. It will be interesting to see how this spins out among Trump supporters, many of whom attend his rallies without sort of any protection, who don't mind standing cheek and jowl with their fellow Trump supporters next to each other in these big aircraft hangars where he tends to have his rallies. How are they going to react, and how is this going to bring this home to them, if at all? Does this mean that perhaps the Republicans and the Trump supporters can start taking COVID seriously now, you know?
Okay.
Oh, we're only at 200,000 people dead in this country. Let's see what happens.
Maya, thank you very much for now. That's our Washington correspondent, Maya Schwader, and here in the studio from our U.S. election coverage team, William Glucroft.
Thanks, Terry.
Well, First Lady Melania Trump, who has also tested positive, has also tweeted. She said that she and the president are feeling good and that she had postponed all upcoming engagements. The White House has confirmed that the president will not be making a planned campaign trip to Florida on Friday. Well, let's get a scientific perspective on all of this. I'm joined now by Eric Feigelding. He's an epidemiologist and a senior fellow at the Federation of American Scientists in Washington, D.C. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Feigelding. What went through your mind when you heard that President Donald Trump had tested positive for the coronavirus?
Well, it was actually it was a matter of time. It was about time because he had been doing a lot of dangerous and risky things. For example, at the debate, half the room was masked, the Democratic side, half the room was entirely unmasked, the Republican side. All his aides never wore any masks or did distancing whatsoever in any of their travels. So, and with Hope Hicks, we actually now, with this just a few minutes ago, we now know that everyone tested negative on Tuesday, everyone in the debate hall. But she tested negative on Wednesday morning, but positive on Wednesday afternoon when she got sick. So this means, because she sort of showed symptoms then, that she was definitely carrying the virus then, and potentially in an infectious pre-symptomatic period. And Donald Trump testing so quickly positive also means he did not get it from her after she was becoming infectious. He probably got it much earlier, which meant he may have also been potentially asymptomatic transmittable at the debate. So I think in certain ways it was inevitable given how risky they were, and potentially that Trump and Hope Hicks were both transmitting the virus at the debate despite testing negative.
Okay, this is a shock for Americans and everyone else watching this election, of course. Do you think the fact that Donald Trump himself, the President of the United States, has contracted the virus will have an impact on the way Americans approach this pandemic?
I think so, and in certain ways, I hope so, because half of America has been in complete denial, more like 40% complete denial. In terms of masks, they think it's overblown. They think it's just liberal media, ramping this story up just to make Trump look bad. But now Trump himself has got it. So in certain ways, the optics of he wasn't careful, he got it. He actually mocked Biden for wearing a mask at the debate. And yet here we are 2 days later. I think that will turn a lot of independents and moderates to wake up to the reality that this virus is serious. And if Donald Trump could get infected, anybody can.
Now, you were one of the first to raise the alarm about the dangers of this virus in the U.S. Do you think the president being infected will impact policy when it comes to dealing with the pandemic moving forward?
Yeah, there's a lot of healthcare reform policies, especially around pre-existing conditions. If anything, the Supreme Court of the U.S. may shoot down Obamacare 1 week after the election in November. So there's a lot on the line. And I think in certain ways, this points out, if Donald Trump can have the best healthcare in the world by paying only $750 in taxes, everyday Americans should be as well and should not be denied coverage for a pre-existing condition, because 50,000 Americans more have a pre-existing conditions every single day. And that's the number of people being infected every day. So I think in certain ways, this will steer the conversation even of healthcare even more and make Trump more vulnerable, because healthcare is his most vulnerable issue.
Mr. Feigelding, thank you very much for talking with us. That was epidemiologist Eric Feigelding. So what about the financial fallout from this news? Let's cross straight over to our financial correspondent in Frankfurt, Ashutosh Pandey. Ashutosh, this is big news, obviously. What are global stock markets making of it?
Well, yes, the sentiments have turned negative and the reaction was swift. The Japanese markets turned negative. They were trading up by then, and once the news struck, they turned negative. And even the markets across Europe have opened in the red. You can see the DAX behind me struggling there at the bottom. It's the same in Paris, same in London. So yes, at this point of time, the markets are really trying to process how they should actually go ahead and trade. They are trying to make sense of this news and what impact would it have on the markets going forward. Basically, there is an element of uncertainty there, especially at a time when the U.S. was struggling to come up with a fresh stimulus package, and the White House is playing a crucial role in those negotiations there. So there is that element of uncertainty there, and the traders are going for safer assets like the dollar, the yen. Japanese yen is performing better. So that's the position as of now. But we should also keep in mind that when Prime Minister Boris Johnson contracted the disease, then also the markets did turn negative. But they did settle down a little later. This time, though, it's a little different because it comes so close to the elections in the U.S., and that adds to the uncertainty.
Okay, any indication at this point what will happen on Wall Street when trading opens there?
We don't expect anything different there. It's going to be the same, perhaps even worse. The futures markets are indicating that the markets are going to open in the negative territory. So it's not going to be any different there. There is going to be a lot of volatility with the elections in sight, and also as the markets try and make sense of what kind of impact would it have on the negotiations related to that stimulus in the U.S. And this news certainly is going to overshadow any other news that was slated for today and was expected to have an impact on the markets, like the jobs number for September.
Ashutosh, thank you very much for your insights there. Ashutosh Pandey in Frankfurt. Let's get the view from Brussels. Our correspondent Barbara Vasil is standing by there where a EU summit is underway, it must be said. We'll get to that in just a moment. But first, Barbara, any reaction from Europe yet to the news about President Donald Trump testing positive for the coronavirus?
European leaders are just beginning to come back into the building, and so far the first ones haven't mentioned it. Probably a little bit later there will be an official statement with the usual best wishes for a speedy recovery. Britain, by the way, was the only country and the first one to be early out of the starting blocks, wishing President Trump all the best. But Britain, of course, is not present in the council building here behind me anymore. They are out. However, if you look at the other level, what leaders might be thinking and hearing this news this morning is, of course, it's striking fear into their hearts that the already chaotic election campaign in the United States might sort of descend into the next level, that the elections might sort of completely go down further towards chaos and a catastrophe. And so that is something that, of course, European leaders don't want to see. Everybody had hoped that things might sort of drag themselves over the line, but that doesn't seem to be sure now, so a lot of thought there.
Okay, just thinking about transatlantic relations already in disarray to some degree, could this have some impact on that?
Of course, nobody will talk about this at the moment. You know, if somebody falls ill, you sort of shut up and say, okay, let's wait what will happen, and we will react later, and we will think about this, officially talk about this later. However, it's clear transatlantic relations had already been in complete disarray, and it is really not to be seen, as everybody now thinks, you know, what can be salvaged from this complete chaos. And on the other hand, of course, European leaders have been looking at Donald Trump's handling of the COVID infections and the corona epidemic with shock, because it is so contrasting to what they do. Look at this summit just here in Brussels, very carefully, socially distant, everybody wearing masks, very few aides, super hygienic conditions. And from what we heard now from the correspondents on the US side, Trump going out and talking to people, nobody wearing masks, and Trump for months and months denying that this was a serious threat. So of course they now see this and think, we worked so hard to contain the virus here in Europe, and look what happened there. And I would not want to speculate what might be going through the minds of one or the other European leaders at that point.
Let's get some European insight now. We're joined by Francisca Bronte. She's European Affairs spokesperson for the Green Party in Germany's lower house of parliament, the Bundestag. Thanks for being with us this morning. What do you make of President Trump testing positive for the coronavirus?
It shows all the craziness of the Trump's handling of the corona crisis over the last couple of months. And it shows again that with Trump, we don't have a reliable ally in the fight, the global fight against COVID-19. And I think that we as Europeans really have to recenter our own efforts and make sure that we become less dependent on external sources for our masks, for our sciences, and really invest in our own health and then help other countries in this world, because the US won't be that actor doing that any longer, which is a shame. In the past, certainly the US would have played a leading role. Now it's up for us Europeans.
Of course, there could be a change of leadership in the U.S. Until we hear otherwise, we are still assuming at this point that the U.S. election will go ahead as planned. How important is this election for Europe?
It is, of course, a very important moment when it comes to the transatlantic relationship. But I believe that we as Europeans, whoever wins, will have to focus on strengthening our own strategic sovereignty, that we have to take over more responsibilities. And that means, for example, for a German government, when we talk about European digital sovereignty, to invest in European technologies, to make sure that we can have a safe digital infrastructure. And as we Germans are debating Nord Stream 2, this is also comes back to how sovereign do we want to be. And I think the elections refocus us on debating what we need to do to become more able to define our own future as Europeans.
Ms. Brandner, thank you very much. That was Francisca Bronte, European Affairs spokesperson for Germany's Green Party in the Bundestag.
Thank you.
Well, let's bring in our Brussels correspondent, Barbara Vazel, who is covering this story, or at least following reactions, while an EU summit is underway there. Barbara, any reactions yet from Europe to the news about Donald Trump testing positive for coronavirus?
Yes, there have been some. Of course, the British government was first out of the starting blocks very early this morning, wishing Donald Trump a speedy recovery. And now the Council President, Charles Michel, who officially presides over this EU summit here, has also sent his good wishes. And then he added the sentence, it's a fight we are all continuing to fight. But what a different battle it has been. And this is something that will be going through everybody's minds here this morning, all the minds of the European leaders who have assembled here again. Because during the pandemic this summer, they really looked in shock and horror at what was unfolding across the Atlantic. And we have just heard the Green parliamentarian talking about strategic independence and sort of the US not leading the battle against corona worldwide anymore. The European Union has really felt this need to sort of take the lead, to talk about the worldwide distribution of a vaccine as soon as it comes onto the market, to sort of raise funds for this vaccine so that all countries, also developing countries, would have access to it. And all these points, they've really felt pushed to sort of go ahead. But also, I mean, what a different battle. If you look at the European summit unfolding here under strictest hygiene measures, all the leaders wearing masks, everybody distancing, very few aides in the room. I mean, everything very restricted. Journalists outside, we can't even enter anymore. So it is a very different picture. But the fear behind all this is, of course, if you look at it, the fear behind all this is that the already chaotic American election campaign might descend into total chaos, might really sort of descend into not happen at all or be postponed or something, and control over it might be completely lost. So that really makes everybody afraid. Fears that are not spoken, but I'm sure that they're being thought.